Hello guys and welcome back to Coniferia, where in this episode we are finally going to expand beyond the sunken highway here in Port Douglas into the very hilly terrain leading up to the mountain ranges of the center of the island. So get ready for some beautiful historic row houses, modern Vancouver inspired skyscrapers, and to round it all up, an expansion of the red line of the Port Douglas Transit Authority tram line up into the hills. Now, whether you are new or regular here in the channel, you are of course very welcome on board as we're building Coniferia, our fictional and highly detailed City Skylines region, taking inspiration from New Zealand, Australia, Canada and the good old USA. And as always, if you enjoy my content, I would greatly appreciate a like, comment, subscribing and enable notifications. It increases the reach of the channel and puts me one step closer to quitting my job and living off City Skylines and cup noodles. Now, you will have to have my poor graphical skills here excused, but I've tried to kind of make an overlay of what we're building. So this blue area you're seeing here, we'll have some high-end shops. It's also going to be residential, so it's going to be a mixed-use area, most adjacent to the highway. If we go to the lighter green shade, that's going to be primarily residential, and we're going to build tall, but we'll have a hopefully pretty fun mix of some pretty luxurious row houses next to tall modernist skyscrapers. And I'm going to go into the history of this area in just a bit. And then the red line hopefully makes it clear that I'll be expanding the red line of the tram network here in Port Douglas up this hill. And the black circles indicate where we'll be placing some stops along the way. So with this said, I think it's time that we start laying out the road network, and I go a bit more in depth into what's the story behind this area. How did it evolve? Now, this area here is named Hillside, but amongst locals it's usually just referred to as the Hill, and it's a pretty simple name. And the brainchild of this whole district was one Sir Morgan Driver, an industrialist that settled here in Port Douglas and quickly grew several business enterprises on the local port. And as Brickville was starting to form, he didn't feel that the inner Brickville neighborhoods were quite, let's say, luxurious enough. He basically felt that although nicer row homes were being built in inner Brickville, it was just a little too close to the port, to the industry, the smoke, the noise, and all the peasants you have working for you. So Mr. Morgan Driver bought up a huge plot of land here on the hillside, and he designated it as the new place to be, basically, for the rich elites of old-time Port Douglas. So he would encourage the construction, and he would himself start the development of some really beautiful old row houses that I've grabbed from the Steam Workshop. They are real life examples from Montreal, I think, and they look absolutely fantastic, and I'm gonna do my best to squeeze them into this area. Today, Hillside is one of the most sought after areas in Port Douglas. The real estate prices here are absolutely insane, and today it's a mix of these old beautiful row houses, some modern renovated row houses, some modern tenement buildings, and then a pretty large concentration of really tall residential skyscrapers. The zoning regulations in this district has been, let's say, made much more progressive in the last couple of decades, simply as an attempt to meet the insane demand here. And as a result, we'll see some pretty tall buildings here that are kind of intermixed with a much lower general density, because the area isn't super dense as such. Remember, it was a row house district for, more than 150 years before any new hipster fueled growth and renovations began. So I'm hopeful you like the sort of the urban fabric we end up creating here. It's a bit of a fun mix, and it's a setup I haven't really used before. Before we start placing anything though, I'm of course going to fix up the road network here and just lay out the basics. And it's important that I get this tram road placed early on, because it's always a bit of a pain to retrofit these highly detailed custom tram roads that I'm using. So I don't use a single vanilla tram road or network here in the save. I think I use these from clues from the workshop instead, and I'm really happy with them.
I need you like I need air to breathe. I need you to save me from me. I'm caught in your wave, I'm drifting away. I need you to save me. Please don't let me drown. 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 Give me all of your lies, 'cause you're my demon in disguise. I learned to love the cage you keep me in, but the walls keep closing in. And I don't wanna die, but your poison feels so right. But do I want you in your bed for me? A perfect storm, a beautiful catastrophe.
We're now placing down the very first buildings here in Hillside, and what I usually like to do, my approach is to try and I've said this many times before, grab the most noticeable structures that you want in the area and place down that first, because they are gonna dominate every single view of this area, and you want to get them right, basically. So that's what we're doing here. We're trying to place down the most prominent buildings, the focal points, basically. And in the case of Hillside, it's gonna be some of the major redevelopments of the last 10, 20 years in the shape of these pretty big towers here. And they are also, just placing this first is just gonna give me a general idea of the space I have to work with. So we're working with hilly terrain, which is always much more challenging than working with flat terrain, at least if you want a highly detailed look, and you guys know I do. So this is also why in general this build just was very time consuming. The hilly terrain means that I have to think extra hard about each building I choose to place, because for instance the one I'm placing right now on the screen, they have quite a big footprint, so if I don't place them up here where it is relatively flat, then they will have large parts of their footprint that's gonna be kind of swallowed by ground, right? It's gonna either stick out or be sunken, and it's not gonna look all that great. So I opt for placing them up here as like the and we'll treat this as like the boundary of the district up here. But other than that, I'm just gonna try a bunch of things. Delete these two because they're just too bulky, and then in return place one of their siblings, which is a little more slender. And it's a lot of back and forth to get the aesthetic that I want, and the buildings placed in a way where I don't feel any one building really stands out too much or is too dominating. And then I'm gonna place more of these 4 or 5 stories medium density buildings throughout this area. Of course, this is gonna be one of the biggest ones. And then in not too long, you'll see me add some row houses. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning, this area sort of turned out like it sort of has the characteristics of an area that I've never really tried building before, and I think it's because I've also started incorporating some of these more modern storefronts. I think these are from the I'm not sure if they're from the plazas and promenades DLC or the shopping malls creator pack, but yeah, it doesn't really matter. Because the fact is that they have a very modern look, but they sort of height-wise they sort of fit into this 2-3 story row house type area, and it creates a really fun mixture when you have a 150-year-old really beautiful brick row house next to a building that is a very modern storefront with big glass panels. Especially since the two buildings have sort of the same, dimensions. So either the row house that stood where the modern building now stands was torn down, or it received just a complete crazy overhaul renovation. Either way, it does tell the story of an area where the zoning regulations and building codes are so progressive that a really old building can be torn down and redeveloped if it's not fit for housing. The city is not gonna fight to preserve it if it isn't really fit for any type of use. And then we end up with an area such as Hillside here, where we have many eras stitched together. And it makes me think that I'd actually love to hear where you guys would live if you were to live here in Hillside. Would it be in one of these modern condo towers with, of course, absolutely insane views of the bay and of the whole region, or would it be in one of these old renovated row houses, or where would it be? I'd be curious to hear that. So, to implement some proper public transport, we are dragging the red line of the tram network up here. Thought it would be really cool to have these tram tracks and trams going up the hills here. It's a bit of a San Francisco vibe. And I'm using the reversible tram AI to enable me to create dead-end tram stops, basically enabling the trams to reverse. There's a couple of reasons I like to use this. So for one, it looks really cool. It's a really cool mod. And the second aspect is that it also allows me to very easily expand the tram network without feeling that I'm making some sort of beautifully created loop station useless. So those are the sort of the reasons I like to go with this, and generally that the tram network will actually be really successful coming up here. There's gonna be quite a bit of passengers, but that makes sense given the fact that this area ultimately after this episode ends up having a huge population. It's definitely one of the densest areas in Coniferia, and it's not because the density is that obvious due to the amount of row houses and buildings that are 2 and 3 stories, but it's just a concentration of pretty tall buildings actually, and the tall ones, they have a really large amount of households. When you use the realistic population mod, you can have a skyscraper, a residential skyscraper with 180 apartments. So that's quite a few people, unless everyone living in the apartment is single. So it's really cool to see the tram network carry lots of people, but there'll be some footage of that later. And so we get to the detailing of this small area here, right next to the sunken highway. And at this point in time, I am many hours deep into this episode, and I sort of knew that I had to wrap it up within too long. So I went for a bit of a simple approach to this, with just this pathway, and then some detailed rocks that I turn into procedural objects and try to rotate, rescale, and move them around to make the cliffside here look a little more dramatic. First, the walkway here, trying to get everything working with the fences. But the cliffside, yeah, I just wanted to look really dramatic and really untouched in sort of way, even though they probably used explosives or cranes to blow out room for the sunken highway here, just carved up nature. In the end, it ends up looking pretty cool with these rocks actually, and then I just add a ton of grass to this hillside here, and I use props because that allows the grass to kind of conform to the terrain. It's not gonna work all that great if I try to use actual grass instead of props, but it works out all right when you use the props. I actually end up adding a viewing platform here. I'm not sure if you'd use that because it's just, you've got a highway, but I guess the idea was to just have some sort of beautification of this area and some sort of, something to attract someone to use this space. And I'm hopeful that the residents of Port Douglas, if they live in these inner city areas, then the noise from the highway doesn't really bother them all that much. And they will actually use these open nature spaces in the city when they get the chance to. But that sort of rounds it up with this final detailing, and then I'll of course wrap up with some hopefully nice cinematics, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.